We'll get started. Just so that everybody's aware, this is the Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and we'll call the meeting to order. I'm going to have the clerk, Hardet, read the protocol for the electronic meetings as we usually do.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Harjeet Gill, and I'm the committee clerk for the Audit and Risk Committee. I'd like to provide a very short protocol for electronic meeting participation. So recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. The committee chair or I will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please unmute your microphone, indicate your name and your objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. Members participating electronically that need to leave the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca. If you leave the meeting, you will be marked absent for any votes thereafter. If you would like to request to speak, please raise your hand in the WebEx meeting or send an email to council@peelregion.ca. For a full view of the presentation slides, please use the focus or stage layout view. We will now proceed to roll call. So Citizen Member Fairhead?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Fonseca?
Yes, here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raz?
Present.
Thank you. Regional Chair Yanika?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Santos?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Starr is present and presiding. And Citizen Member Zuberi is absent due to a personal matter. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Chair Starr.
Thank you. Harjeet, I'm just wondering, I'm looking at the agenda. I don't see the previous minutes of the previous meeting.
Yeah, so previous meeting minutes, yeah, they're approved at Regional Council.
Okay, so then they don't go back onto our agenda. I just want to make sure of that.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And declarations of any conflicts of interest. I have multiple screens here, so when you want to speak, as the clerk indicated, if you can go to the bottom bar, put your hand up, because I'll have to revolve back and forth, otherwise I won't see you. But I will follow the indicator on the bottom if you do want to speak. Thanks. Okay, we don't have any conflicts of interest. Approval of the agenda. And I'd like to add, I'm not sure, Madam Clerk, if Neil Fairhead has a proposed motion, and I'm not sure if we should bring it under the agenda or under new business. What's your suggestion?
We can add that under new business.
Okay, so then we'll just have the approval of the agenda. Any comments, changes? Moved by Councillor Rass, seconded by, well, we don't need a seconder, but Councillor Sinclair. All those in favor? Thank you. And we don't have any delegations, and we have the first report, Jennifer Weinman reporting, and Anila Lalani on Enterprise Audit Service, or excuse me, on a report on corporate risk profile. So I'm not sure who's going first, but we'll let you folks decide that.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Chair and members of the Audit and Risk Committee. Anila Lalani and I are with you today to discuss the 2020 corporate risk profile for the region. Next slide, please. Identifying and managing key risks can assist the region in achieving its strategic outcomes. We are here today to talk to you about the region's third corporate risk profile. Though the region has been managing risks at all times, the development of the corporate risk profile enables the region to review risks from a strategic lens and can assist in answering questions such as, are we managing the right risks? Are we doing enough? Are we doing too much? Or are we on track? The region of Peel was one of the first among its municipal comparators to develop an annual corporate risk profile. The federal government does produce a corporate risk profile for a number of its various agencies, just to provide a little bit of context. Next slide, please. So Anila and I are going to walk through some high-level information about the profile, talk to you about how we've added in a new area into the profile, linking in the impacted services for the risks, talk about ways that the profile can be used to support the region's decision-making, then discuss some of the risks that have manifested during the year, and then what the ongoing steps are for keeping the corporate risk profile managed and monitored throughout the organization. And then lastly, we will take any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. A corporate risk profile is a communication tool that identifies both internal and external risks facing an organization. It is a tool to bring awareness to the risks that exist at the strategic level and put them on the table for consideration when key decisions are being made and also when mitigation plans are being considered. And then we've included some information about corporate risk and what that is, and that is an uncertain internal or external event that may cause a significant negative impact to an organization and may impact an organization's ability to deliver on its planned strategic outcomes. At this point, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Anila, and she will provide some details on the corporate risk profile. And next slide, please.
Thank you, Jennifer. 17 corporate risks are identified in the 2020 region's corporate risk profile. If any of these risks materialized, it may impact the region's ability to achieve its strategic outcomes. These risks fall in three broad categories: strategic risks, operational risk, and reputational risk. Some of these are external risks, where region may have little ability to reduce the likelihood from occurring, but may be able to reduce the impact. Some of these risks are internal risks, where region may be able to control the likelihood and reduce the impact by implementing adequate mitigation plans. Included in the profile are the mitigation plans, also called controls, that management have put in place or are in a process of developing those plans. Referring to Table 4 on page 5.1-8, these controls have been color-coded in the profile. The green color indicates that controls exist to mitigate the risk. Yellow indicates that management is in a process of developing controls to address the risk. And gray shading indicates that management may have little ability to manage those external risks, but management will continue to monitor them and implement strategies to manage or minimize risk exposure. Next slide, please. In this profile, we have mapped regional services to each of the risks to better understand risk exposure. For example, with the risk of economic downturn, there could be potential impact on regions' services such as housing support, income supports, employment supports, and many other listed in the profile. Next slide, please. Now the question is, what do we do with this risk information? With the term of council priorities, it may be used as a key input into strategic planning. It may assist the council in identifying strategies to deliver on the term of council priorities, an opportunity to consider the risks associated with different strategic options. It may validate areas for risk-taking, identifying areas and tactics where risk-taking may help maximize benefits. Consideration should be given to both selection of the tactics and the risks involved. It may validate where risk-taking can provide the best value. It allows risk-informed decision-making when events that can cause disruptions are identified and actions are taken to reduce the likelihood of those events, help us limit and could help us limit the damage and contain the cost. It may allow the organization to maintain a balance between value, cost, and risk. The value being pursued, for example, community benefit, the risk involved in pursuing, and the cost associated with managing the risk. Next slide, please. Some risks manifested during the year and may have significant impacts on the region's ability to achieve its strategic plan outcomes in the timelines projected. The two new risks, infectious disease and emergency preparedness, have manifested and have impacted everyone globally, including the region. In addition, there are other risks that have manifested this year. If there is an increased intolerance within Peel and adjacent communities and residents, achievement of the Community for Life vision for the region may be at risk. There are uncertainties surrounding changes to policies and funding to the region. Similar to other organizations and government levels, the region continues to experience the impact of economic downturn, unemployment, and competition for talent. As mentioned before, with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic impacting our community, the risks around infectious disease and being prepared for the emergencies have been realized. At the same time, responding to this emergency has diverted region's resources, and this may impact the achievement of the region's strategic outcomes. Enterprise Risk and Audit Services will continue to work with the service managers to identify risks that manifest during the year and include them in the profile. Next slide.
Thanks, Sunila. So in conclusion, for our next steps, our division will continue to work with management to monitor risks, to discuss management's mitigation plans, and to update the corporate risk profile through working with the strategic planning group to help ensure the corporate risk profile is used as an input into the term of council priority decision-making process, identifying and managing key risks that can assist in achieving the region's strategic outcomes, and bringing back this corporate risk profile on a regular basis to the Audit and Risk Committee for discussion and for endorsement. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time, and we would be happy to open the floor up for any questions you may have.
Good presentation. Certainly covers the whole organization. The first member we have on board is Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk about the item entitled Emergency Preparedness. And I sit on the Emergency Management Committee. And early in the term, we approved a list of 10 threats, which were all physical. So major floods, maybe major ice storm tearing down hydro towers, explosions, and so on, all rather discrete physical threats, where you could call the cops and put a security cordon around them, bring in fire marshals or whoever the relevant authorities were and deal with the matter and get on with recovery. And problem I see it is COVID-19 is not a physical threat. It's threatens the whole economy and social structure, and in various ways. We probably haven't even learned the full extent of it. And I'm suggesting here that we need a completely different emergency plan from those that are physical. And we need one for zoonotic and epidemics. And it might include quite a different set and approach to emergency preparedness. And I'm thinking here that you can't put a cordon around COVID-19. We're sort of attempting it in Canada, but you have to basically cordon off Canada. And there's been various efforts to put lockdowns in locations in the GTA, but not others. And that doesn't seem to work very well. So a lot of learning going on. I just wanted to point this out. In my view, in emergency preparedness, we have the standard 10 threats, and we have a pretty good grip on how to handle them, but not epidemics. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
I'm not sure if you want to respond, staff. If not, we'll move on to the next speaker, Councillor Rass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's always a good refresh to go through our corporate risk profile. On page 5.1-10, when it comes to risk profile number 7, the ineffective growth management planning, I understand, water, wastewater, waste, to a degree, roads, these things are within our control, and to that extent, I would agree with the green labeling on it. But when it comes to the land use planning piece, I feel like that should be its own element or its own risk, only because so much of land use planning is really outside of our control. So I'm not too sure that aspect of it should be green, and I'm just wondering if staff can comment on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I can start. Certainly through you, Councillor Rash, you make a very good point, and we have seen, as you well know, a broad range of provincial initiatives, legislative changes, and other actions that have been taken. So we can certainly take that back and look at how it's reported and whether or not there is some value in separating the things we do control from those that we don't. I guess there's probably a broader risk in here that speaks to, legislation coming from the province and that kind of government policy change that can certainly happen in a broad range of areas. I mean, we deliver a lot of provincial programs, and so we see those kinds of changes happening quite regularly. But certainly we'll take that back and have a second look at whether there's a more, there's a distinction to be made within that box on those two pieces for sure. I think you make a very good point.
Okay, that's all the question I have. I'll maybe we can come back to the next meeting to continue that, or the meeting thereafter to have that conversation further. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next, we have on the board Councillor Santos.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the presentation and the report. I'm curious about, sorry, that's my dog, 5.1-8, items 1 through 5. I'm just wondering. So I see here risk managers, director community connections, etc. And I think that some of these risks that are listed that are in grade control, a lot of mitigation of it has to do with communications and engaging the community externally. I just want to confirm that those measures are in place, because I don't see like a communications, the communications department associated with part of the risk mitigation on the report.
I'm not sure if Jennifer wants to speak to that. And obviously within the report itself, we haven't drilled down to the detailed level of tactics, but clearly the risk mitigation measures that you would have to take, particularly around the first one that speaks to social cohesion. I mean, a communications plan would be a critical part of that. So I think part of the challenge, Councillor Santos, is this is a very high level assessment, and the mitigation measures are mentioned but not really spelled out in a great deal of detail. I mean, if you were to look within emergency plans around some of these things, you would see the kinds of tactics that I think you're speaking to. And obviously we've had significant conversations at Regional Council about the need for and the delivery of a broad range of communication tactics and responses to the challenges that we're seeing at the moment. So I think my answer is they're there. This document doesn't capture that level of detail, so hopefully that helps with the response.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Janice. I think it is really important with that level of uncertainty and risk that the communication side of things is highlighted. It's one of kind of our only tools, and I'm curious to know, and perhaps I can get more detail online, what those communication strategies have been so far, and where those opportunities are for improvement. So thank you, Janice.
Yeah, and you might recall that we did a fairly lengthy report to Regional Council 1 meeting ago, 2 meetings ago, I forget which one, my apologies. So we can certainly circle back and, at next audit committee if you wish. But clearly, and it's an evolving document, I would tell you that as well. Obviously, given the shifts that we've seen in the demands that the pandemic are making for different types of communication. And if you want, we can also take that conversation offline and have go back and revisit that report as well. But your point's very well taken, and absolutely we understand the critical nature of communications in terms of managing these risks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Janice. Next we have Member Fairhead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much for an excellent high-level presentation that appeared to cover our entire universe. I'm going to go in a different direction, being an engineer, and there's one item that I don't really understand, which is at the bottom of page 5.1-14. And I'd like to know a little bit more about the context of the Regional Council endorsing a capital deferral strategy to mitigate the risk of lower development charges, revenues of up to 700. I'm afraid I don't I wanted to make sure I understood the context of that.
Again, I can start, Mr. Chair, but our CFO, Stephen Van Alfwegen, is also here, and he can drill down into the details of that. But the challenge we have is we have a process of collecting levies or development charges from those who are building new housing, commercial buildings, all new development within the region of Peel. The charge is built on an infrastructure plan that supports growth, and it has to be updated every 5 years. So the process of updating, we tie it into our land use planning, we tie it into our population and employment requirements. We project forward the infrastructure that we will need, how much and when, to support the growth that is expected. And to build on that, the province tells us our population and employment targets. So we have to build to those, or we have to plan to those, sorry. And then we estimate the cost of what that infrastructure is. That then forms the basis for which we charge the developers on an individual project by project basis the fees for funding that growth infrastructure. What we are seeing, there's certainly a significant amount of work that goes into it, but what we are seeing is there is a growing gap between what we are projecting and what we are collecting. And so as a consequence of that, we have not collected the revenue that we expected, and therefore one of our mitigation strategies to that is to look at the timing and the type of infrastructure that we are expected to put in place to support growth. In fact, we just recently updated our development charge bylaw, and Council approved a new version in January of 2021, so just a few weeks ago. And so as we update the bylaw, we look at both should the fee go up, and I can tell you in this particular bylaw, the fees did go up to help mitigate some of those challenges. But we still, through built form and other variables that are happening within the development industry and within the type of development that we're seeing, there is still a delta. And so this is one of the reasons why we're having to look at this issue and look at the potential for deferring some of that infrastructure. Stephen can probably talk in a little more detail, the types of infrastructure. I can tell you primarily the biggest part of our development levy, is water wastewater. So pipes in the ground to deliver water and take wastewater away. And so that's really where we've had to focus. And of course, the region's responsibility to deliver water, wastewater means that infrastructure has to be put in place up front. So we build it, we incur debt in some cases to do that, and then we pay that debt back through the development levies. So because we're forecasting the revenue and the growth, but we're building in front of that, we're seeing a mismatch. And so that's one of the risks, significant risks that we're in the process of managing. And we have a whole strategy that we're working to do that. So maybe at this point, I'll turn it over to Stephen to talk about some of the mitigation strategies and the work that's being done.
Thank you, Janice, and through the chair. This is at the time of crafting the risk framework, when Peel started studying this issue at the beginning, back in July of last year, we went to council. In a traditional recession, we modeled what the impact would be on growth, the pace of growth in an economic recession. And the pandemic recession is actually turning out to be quite unique in its impact on growth. I'm sure you've heard about what's happening on the residential sector. So we're actually seeing robust residential growth, but we're not seeing some of the employment growth, so office and commercial primarily. So this recession does look differently. So what we did is brought forward to council the notion of a capital deferral strategy. Even in good times, we try to match the timing of our growth to our infrastructure servicing to that of growth. But as Janice mentioned, at times we'll put infrastructure in place, sometimes 5, 10, or 15 years, even before growth comes, because some of the communities don't get built out all at the same time. So there is that timing issue, and we do debt finance for that. So we're trying to mitigate the risk of employment and population growth in terms of our fiscal health. So that's really what this is about. And what we're really seeing now with this particular pandemic-driven recession is an acceleration in the changing nature of employment. As people work remotely, maybe will continue to work remotely to some extent, and as people are shifting their behaviors to shopping online, you're not going to see the bricks and mortar buildings going up to service in those kinds of markets, and maybe that'll continue to accelerate post-pandemic. And so it's always important that we're managing how we time the infrastructure investments so that we're not too far ahead of the curve. And should those trends not reverse themselves, then at least we're not at risk from that perspective. So that's why this one made the list, and it's a significant issue for the Region of Peel because we are infrastructure intensive.
Through the chair, thank you very much.
Two things here. Stephen, that's probably going to be one of your last comments that we're going to hear from you because you're retiring tomorrow. So I want to say two things. Glad to see you go, and congratulations. Wish you well on in the future, and don't be afraid to come back and see us again. But anyway, I just want to let the rest of the committee members know that Stephen is retiring tomorrow after a great career. So on behalf of all of us, Stephen, thank you very much. I'm going to suggest, Neil, since you had the last speaker's position here, you also wanted to speak to the motion that you're bringing forward. And I think I think the risk management, whatever, is pertinent to what you were going to bring up under new business. I think it would be probably opportunistic right now to go through what you'd like to do and let the rest of the members know.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry about this. I've just had to rearrange some technology in the last few days. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As we are the audit and risk, right? I prefer to think it as the risk committee. I like the fact we get presentations at this high level and we concentrate a lot on what are the risks and what are we doing. But I wonder if it might be useful to the committee to learn a little bit more about how we're doing it, what the processes are, and how in particular, above all, how in particular do we keep our eyes open for a risk which is actually just a probability, accelerating and becoming an adverse event quickly. So I would like to suggest that we ask for a little more information on the process behind this. And there are three areas I'm particularly interested in, so I put them together into a draft possible motion that and I'm going to read it to you. We request that future reports concerning key risks include the following three items for each of the most significant risks, i.e. the very highest importance. 1, a list of the associated leading indicators, together with a description of how they assist in identifying that a particular risk is becoming more probable and how fast. And an example I might have of this was on your, what am I looking at, 4.3.5, negative publicity, where we talk about assessing sentiment and reaching out, watching the social media. And I think that, is there an opportunity to is there a leading indicator that's summing up the amount of negative feedback, the tone of it, and the positioning, which gives us some idea of how many people it impacts? That's my example of a leading indicator. If that starts getting worse strongly, then we know the probability of a real adverse event is growing higher. The second item is that a risk management or mitigation plan for each item, remember, that shows what must be done when a risk becomes an actual adverse event before it happens. So the plan is before that happens, so that we're not relying on people making such decisions on the fly and potentially under conditions of stress and time shortage, which I assume that the pandemic is putting that in spades. The third item is a report on the rehearsal of the risk management plan, showing what weaknesses were found and how they were corrected, because we actually practiced it, we rehearsed it, and B, what people doing the rehearsal learned about not just their roles, but also if they need to interact with any other groups beyond their normal connections. So they might have to build some interactions ahead of time because of the rehearsal. And the last thing to go into the motion will be, and if any of these three items for the most significant risks are not available, then we request the inclusion of a schedule for the production of those items. I open to suggestions. Does anybody else think this is of value in our risk role as opposed to our audit role? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
The first thing I'm going to do is suggest that to staff to, since it was just brought on, is to maybe, I'm not sure if it's a motion we need or direction or some discussion, even between yourself and staff, and to find out exactly what we can and can't do, and maybe a response. I'm not sure. Maybe our CAO can respond and just give us an idea. I think some of the comments made are very pertinent, but at the same time, they're far-reaching. So, anybody on staff would like to comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, I'm quite happy to comment. I mean, I think these are all great questions. I think we have good answers to some. I'm not sure we have good answers to all. But with your with your indulgence, because I did note you started with future reports, so I appreciate that. To give us some time to take this back. I think the indicators piece will be something that we would be able to satisfy fairly easily in most cases, and I think we would also want to agree on the definition of the word significant, and I appreciate the fact that you included that word as well. So obviously, we're not going to do this for every single risk because some of them are considered low, but maybe for the ones that are considered high, we can consider that. The mitigation plan, I think, is another area where we would be able to respond, and I would expect for these large risks, we have those. Even quite frankly, with respect to the pandemic, most organizations have had a pandemic plan since SARS. I think what we're finding with this one is even those pandemic plans never contemplated that pandemics would last for over a year. And so you're quite right, that has added a new dimension to the planning framework, because most of our plans thought, something happens several weeks later, we get through it, or even a couple of months later, and that certainly has proven not to be the case here. On the rehearsal side, that's something I would have to circle back on. We do practice under our emergency plan for some of the things that Councillor Sinclair referred to earlier. What happens if a plane crashes, and what happens if we have a blackout, which we did many years ago. The physical risks. I'm not sure necessarily that we do some of that rehearsal on some of the other areas, but I am quite happy to take this back and look at how we can integrate this into our future reporting reporting back. For the areas that we're able to satisfy sooner rather than later, I'm quite happy to bring an interim report back to add those elements to the report that you have today, and then talk about how we can manage some of the other pieces and what we would see as the areas where those additional steps, if I can use that, if we're not already doing it, could assist or be implemented. And so if that suits in terms of the motion, I'm happy to take that as direction, and we will take it back and start thinking about how to incorporate these pieces into future reporting.
Yeah. I would think that's probably the best approach. It's not going to happen instantly, but I think that's not what you were expecting anyway, Neil. So I think if at the end we could do that right now, we could have a motion. Of course, the problem is that not everybody has. I don't think anybody has that in front of them, but just myself and yourself. And I'm wondering if we can provide that copy to the clerk and then distribute. And maybe we don't even need a motion, because I think the CEO has indicated that she's well aware of the points you've brought out. We can do it as direction, and that way you can get the copy out to everybody, and we'll certainly follow up on it.
Yeah, and to your point, Mr. Chair, thank you. With respect to timing, you are absolutely right. In fact, one of the things you're going to talk about later in your agenda is the state of our audit work plan, because as you know, we have reassigned and redeployed many of our employees, including some of our audit staff, to the mass vaccination program. So our organization is really just not firing on all cylinders now in terms of looking at some of these issues, but we will take that back. So if you can, through the clerk, provide that direction to myself and to Jennifer, our Director of Audit, then we certainly will give it full consideration. They are excellent suggestions. Thank you.
Well, why don't we do it this way? We'll have a motion basically accepting the report, receiving the report, Neil, receiving the report, and to include your comments, and as discussed in the meeting today, and we'll provide a copy to all those concerned. How's that? Something like that, I think, would probably cover it. Harjeet, would that be satisfactory?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Starr. That is accurate. We will capture the details of the discussion in the meeting minutes, and we'll take that as direction to staff.
Okay. I don't see anybody else on the board, so it's moved by Member Fairhead. You've heard the motion. All those in favor? I don't see any dissenters. Carried. Okay, we'll move on and thank you for your comments, Neil. Always very, I was going to say inquisitive, but at the same time, it helps us move the whole corporation along. Okay, our next report is on the fraud information. And that's a report for information. Not sure if there's any questions. I'll check the board here. Any questions, comments? Seeing none. Moved
we have
by
Councillor Sinclair on the board.
Okay. He's trying to do a sneak in. Okay, Councillor Sinclair.
I'm not fast enough, Mr. Chairman. No, I just wanted to say what great work this was, and the whole notion of going to staff at this level and asking them, what do you think about fraud protection and risk, and having them come forward is excellent. And to me, the temptation for fraud is probably always there somewhere. And really it matters what happens when you discover it, and do you take action? and fraud and bribes cripple economies in some parts of the world. And I recall an issue back quite a few years ago. There was the plastic extrusions for Blue Box. Staff member was in charge of that procurement and started asking vendors for kickbacks. And so the Region of Peel Police checked it out, arrived at the fellow's cubicle office desk in Peel and hauled up and jugged them in. So I really think this is a great program and well done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I don't see anyone else on the board. Councillor Sinclair, you want to move that for information receipt?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All those in favor? Carried. The next item, 5.3, is the Enterprise Audit Services Risk-Based Work Plan. And you have the report in front of you. And I'm not sure, I don't see, are we having a presentation?
We don't have a presentation, but I believe Councillor Raz has a question.
Yeah, that's why when I saw her hand go up, I just wondered if we were. Councillor Raz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question with respect to that work plan and understanding that we have a number of staff that are redeployed. Is it still a realistic work plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Jennifer Weinman speaking. And we are quite comfortable in saying at this point in time, given the redeployments of the staff, that we will not be able to complete the entire work plan, but what we are providing with the projects we have listed is that when the staff does return from the redeployments, which we would expect to be in September, that then these will be the projects that they will commence working on at that time. And all of those projects have been selected to take a look at the business processes and the region's response as related to COVID. So where we have changed processes because of remote work or processes because we're dealing with the emergency, we are going to focus on taking a look at those areas in our audit work. And then those projects would be concluded and coming back to the committee sometime in 2022 as staff complete those audits. We would most likely be starting 5 of the projects that are listed there, and then we can select from the list of projects there based on the current resource constraints in those program areas. So we do try to balance when we're coming in for an audit to make sure that the program area has sufficient capacity at that time to undertake gathering the information we need and responding and interviewing with us. So it's more of a list of projects to be started, not to be completed in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rass. Don't see anyone else on the board. Councillor Rass, will you move the recommendation for approval? All those in favor? I see that's carried. We have no communications. We were going to do the information by Neil Fairhead, but we've done that under the report. We don't have any in camera. Next meeting is April 29th. And as I always say, if that's giving people heartburn, let us know so we can change the date or accommodate you. And adjournment, moved by Councillor Fonseca. All those in favor? Enjoy the next week. Next Wednesday, you're going to see the weather at +12. So there you go. Maybe the lion is going to go out like a lamb. Who knows? Anyway, enjoy your weekend and look forward to the next meeting. And always enjoy the conversations. Thank you all.
Thank you.